I love how DC villains are basically the biggest haters. The Reverse Flash hates Barry Allen with all his heart. He even wiped out Barry's childhood best friend out of existence. Black Manta, which I will not be saying what he did, but we all know what he did to Aquaman. Cheetah always wants to smoke with Wonder Woman. Sinestro is always beefing up with Hal and the rest of the Green Lantern Corps. But one of the biggest haters in the DC universe has got to be Jeff Bezos. This man is like a 13th level intellect, has all the money in the world, and yet his whole purpose in life is to take down Superman because of his large ego. That is some next level hating right there, which honestly makes Lex Luthor the perfect antagonist. Lex Luthor is the most iconic Superman villain out of Superman's rogues gallery. Out of all the villains like Darkseid, Yellow Darkseid, Doomsday, and more, the billionaire bald guy is the best out of all of them. The perfect foil against Superman. Why is that the case? What makes Lex Luthor the perfect antagonist? As we know about the Big Blue Scout, he's the everyday man. He's the hero that represents hope, heroism, humanity, all that goody two-shoes stuff. His humanity is what defines him and what makes him the hero he is today. He is the superhero. So, with all that goodness, that pure heart, how do you rival against that? How do you make an antagonist that perfectly goes against everything that Superman represents? Well, that's where Grant Morrison comes in. Lex Luthor, created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Lex Luthor back in the day was depicted more of an egotistical scientist trying to take over the world or gain some financial success or whatever. The reason he hated Superman so much at that time was because of a lab incident in which Superman intervened and led Lex Luthor to lose his hair, which drove Lex to hate Superman for what he's done. I can't blame Lex. If someone made me bald, I would hate that person for the rest of my life. In later years, this silly explanation would be shifted to becoming more serious reasons for why Lex hates Superman. Lex Luthor was raised in the slums of Metropolis. He was raised by two abusive parents. Lex had enough of the life he was living in. He wanted to become a very powerful person. So he decided by utilizing his early signs of intellect, he was able to set up his own life insurance policy. And then Lex would sabotage his parents' car, leading them to their death. And because they died, Lex Luthor would get the money from the insurance and would kickstart himself. In his adult years, he would start his business LexCorp after selling off his designer drug. Lex was always about wanting to be at the top of the world. His huge ego made him want to be a god. In order to make himself that way, he would take down any corporate business in any means necessary. Blackmail, threats, etc. All of the above. This is how Lex became the man he is. The origin specifically from Post-Crisis shows a distinct parallel to Superman in a way. Clark was raised by two great parents that made him the way he is as Superman. Superman, a common guy who has the powers of everything, but decides to do good. Unlike Lex, he lived in a very toxic environment in which the only way for him to reach the top was to do everything at any cost to get there. His selfishness, his ego is what made him the way he is. One is an extreme case of altruism, and the other is an extreme case of selfishness. Superman has hair and Lex Luthor doesn't. That's the big difference, alright? Luthor represents the bad and the ugly of humanity. That selfishness is the only way to thrive and be the best that you can be. Luthor wants to be a god, the one person to take over everything. His business, in a way, is to show off his ego as the savior of Metropolis. But of course, that doesn't happen because of the Big Blue Scout, which is part of the reason why Lex Luthor hates Superman so much. There's many things that Lex Luthor hates about Superman. Besides Superman causing him to go bald, in later incarnations, it sums up to one thing: jealousy. His ego can't handle the fact that Superman is praised the way he is. In the comic book series Luthor, Man of Steel, we see Luthor's perspective on Superman. Lex Luthor would describe Superman as not a man. Superman could never be a man. That Superman has so many people fooled due to his appearance. He sees Superman as the end of humanity. That instead of depending on our human prowess, we depend on someone who is an alien. Lex can't believe that an alien could ever be human. His ego won't accept that. So he does everything he can to show off to the world what the extent of humanity can bring. That we don't need someone like Superman. In this story, he would create this android named Hope, and it basically went crazy after almost killing Toyman. And Superman would defeat Hope, which basically killed Lex's hope. Lex is a very, very weird man. But Lex Luthor is all about trying to prove to humanity that we don't need Superman. Superman can't be trusted. With all the power that Superman has, he can be corrupted. He can decide one day to just destroy the planet if he wanted to. Sounds like a lot of talking points a lot of Superman haters make when especially referring to injustice and other Elseworld stories that doesn't reflect Superman. Lex Luthor's trying to say Superman can't be trusted with all the powers he has because power corrupts. Which is very, very hypocritical of him to think that way. Which is due to the fact that he has all the power of the world himself too. Yeah, he may not have the bronze or, the super speed or like any special powers, but his mind is his biggest superpower. He's a billionaire with one of the most successful companies on the planet. And instead of using that power to benefit mankind, to do all he preached about, trying to uplift humanity, trying to show that humanity's the best, he uses that power for his own selfish gains, to stay on the top of the world and to take down Superman, which adds so much to Superman and Lex Luthor's dynamic. Both have the powers to do anything in the world. But the alien, Superman, who crash landed on Earth, is more human than the human billionaire who has all the resources in the world. I remember the movie Superman Doomsday when Lex Luthor actually had the cure for cancer. And instead of trying to share that information with others, he decides to try to make a profit out of it and tried to stretch it for over a 10-year treatment plan. This just goes to show how petty Lex Luthor really is. For example, when Lex Luthor ran for president at many points of history just to mess with Superman. I really like the DCAU version because he wanted Superman to snap to become like the evil version of the Superman we saw from the other Earth. Or like in the comic book For All Seasons, when he does everything he can to drive Superman and push him to his lowest point to never return to Metropolis. Lex Luthor could not see the fact that an alien like Superman is trying to do good. In All-Star Superman, it literally takes Lex to get the powers of Superman to realize why Superman does what he does. It's just so ridiculous that Lex would have done so much for the world, but because of Superman, he took it personally. Like Superman said, you could have saved the world years ago if it mattered to you, Luthor. All of these things I mentioned is what makes Lex Luthor a perfect foil against Superman. Lex Luthor is basically the voice for all the doubts and criticisms of Superman's character. The voice for those who think Superman is not the person they think he is. Lex Luthor doesn't want to believe that someone like Superman can be human, that Clark has all the humanity in himself. But unfortunately, Lex fails to realize his own hypocrisy, that Superman does more for humanity than Lex ever could. Luthor cares about himself and his pride and would do anything to make sure he's on the top. Lex Luthor is the only person to believe that a man could not fly.